The tiny island of Philae, a mere 450 meters long and less than 150 meters wide, captured the imagination of countless travelers to Egypt from early times. It was famed for its beauty and was known as the Pearl of Egypt. Plants and palm trees grew from the fertile deposits that had collected in the crevices of the granite bedrock. Amelia Edwards wrote in 1873, "The Philae, as seen from the level of a small boat, the island with its palms, its colonnades, its pylons seems to rise out of the river like a mirage. Piled rocks frame it on either side, and purple mountains close up the distance. As the boat glides nearer between glistening boulders, those sculptured tumors rise higher and ever higher against the sky. They show no sign of ruin or of age. All look solid, stately, perfect." Philae, once a great religious center, was dedicated to the cult of the goddess Isis, and its sanctuaries belong mainly to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, roughly between the 4th century before current era and beginning of the 4th century current era. It was the completion of the first Aswan Dam in 1902 that created a lake and flooded the island and its monuments for part of the year. But the building of the high dam in 1960 created more serious problems. Finally, it was decided to build a coffer dam around the island and to pump out the water so that nearly all the monuments could be dismantled and transferred to nearby Aquila Island. This work began in 1972 and finished in 1980. The sanctity of Philae during the Greco-Roman period outrivaled many of the other cities of Egypt. It had become the center of the cult Isis, which was revived during the Sati period, 664 to 525 BC. The Ptolemies sought to please the Egyptians by building temples to their most beloved gods and goddesses. Ptolemy II, 285 to 246 BC, started construction of the main temple of Isis. The temple of her consort Osiris was built on a neighboring island, Bai, only a portal of which remains. Their son Horus, or Horrendus, as he was called by the Ptolemies, had a temple of his own on Philae. Other structures on the island included a small temple to Imhotep, builder of Zoser's step pyramid of Saqqara, who was later deified as a god of medicine, and temples to two new deities, Mandalis and Arhestenotor. The monuments of Philae cover 4 major epochs: the last part of the Pharaonic era, the Ptolemaic period, the Roman epoch, and the Christian period. The chief monuments are the Temple of Isis and her son Horus, the beautiful Arch of Hadrian, the Temple of Hathor, and the Chios, which is also known as Pharaoh's Bed. The entrance to the island was originally constructed by Nekhtamos, the first ruler of the last dynasty. It was designed with 14 columns and 2 sandstone obelisks on the river front. Unfortunately, a particularly high flood swept the structure away soon after it was completed, and it lay in ruin until Ptolemy II had it restored. Some of the columns were reconstructed. These have double capitals. The lower parts are decorated with different floral forms, and the upper bear heads of Hathor. The screen walls between the columns, crowned with concave cornices bearing rows of Uranus serpents, showed Nekhtamos making offerings to the deities. We now stand on the threshold of Philae. Before us a great outer court opens up. This leads to the Temple of Isis, about 100 meters ahead. The court is flanked by colonnades. On the right, only half a dozen of the planned 16 columns were completed. Also to the right are the temples of Arhostnofer, Mandalis, and Imhotep. To the left, the 32 columns of the colonnade follow the shoreline. No two capitals are alike. The shaft showed Tiberius making offerings to the Egyptian gods. The ceiling is decorated with stars and flying vultures. Representations are all finely executed and mostly well preserved. For example, between the first 2 columns above the window, Nero is depicted offering 2 eyes to Horus, Isis, and the Lord of the 2 lands. The huge entrance pylon lies ahead. It is 18 meters high and 45 meters wide. Each of the two towers is decorated with mighty figures of Neos Dionysus, Ptolemy the 12th, depicted as Pharaoh and wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. He clasps enemies by the hair and raises his club above their heads to smite them in the presence of Egypt's best loved deities, Isis and Nephthys, Horus and Hathor. Thus did the Ptolemaic kings give themselves credit for suppressing Egypt's traditional enemies and honoring local traditions. Two granite lions guard the entrance. They are of late Roman times and reflect Byzantine influence. On the lintel of the gateway between the two towers of the pylon is a representation of the pharaoh Nectamonus I in a dancing attitude in front of Osiris, Isis, Ram, and Hathor. Much of the dignity and austerity of the divine pharaoh as the powerful and unapproachable son of the sun god was lost during the late period when representations tended to show informal attitudes. Passing through the gateway, we come to the great court. To the right is a colonnade and priest quarters. To the left is the birthhouse, which may be also approached from a doorway at the center of the left-hand tower of the entrance pylon. The birthhouse is an elegant little building. The entrance portico has a roof supported by 4 columns and is followed by 3 chambers, one behind the other. Around 3 sides of the building runs a colonnade with floral capitals surmounted with sistrum capitals and Hathor heads. The reliefs throughout the building relate to the birth of Horus, the son of Isis, and his growth to manhood to avenge his father's death. All are in a fine state of preservation. The first chamber is not decorated. In the second, some quaint protective deities are depicted among the papyrus plants where Horus was born. In the third chamber is a scene on the rear wall near the bottom, showing Isis giving birth to her son in the marshes of the delta. With her are Amun-Ra and Thoth. Behind Amun-Ra is the serpent goddess of Lower Egypt and the god of wisdom. Behind Thoth is the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt and the god of reason. Above this scene, Horus, as a hawk, stands among the papyrus plants, crowned with a double crown. On the left-hand wall, the standing child Horus suckles at the breast of Isis. Ptolemy IX hands 2 mirrors to Hathor, who places her hands in blessing on the head of the child. Returning to the great court, we approach the second pylon, which is smaller in size than the entrance pylon and is not aligned with it. To the right is a large granite block inscribed by the Shukite pharaoh Taharka 730 before current era, which is therefore the earliest piece of work on the island. The Temple of Isis comprises a tiny open court, a hypostyle hall, an antechamber, and a sanctuary. The walls have fine reliefs of the Ptolemaic kings and Roman emperors, repeating traditional and by now familiar, if not somewhat wearisome, ritual scenes relating to offering to the Egyptian gods, staking out the temple, and consecrating the sacred area. The hypostyle hall, which is separated from the court by screened walls between the first row of columns, is adorned with colored relief from the lower to the upper reaches of the wall, across the ceiling, and from shaft to capital. The columns and capitals provide a good example of the style, decoration, and coloring of the Greco-Roman period, when less regard was paid to natural colors. For example, the blue ribs of the palms stand out somewhat garishly from the light green palm twigs on the capitals of the columns. The sanctuary has 2 tiny windows and a pedestal on which the sacred barge bearing the statue of Isis stood. This pedestal was installed by Ptolemy III and his wife Bernice. Surrounding the sanctuary are the usual priestly chambers and storerooms. To the left of the stairway is a doorway leading out of the temple of Isis. A road leads to the temple of Horus, son of Isis, and Hadrian's gateway. The latter contains the famous relief relating to the source of the Nile on the right-hand wall. In the second row from the top, it shows blocks of stone heaped one upon the other, and standing on the top is a vulture representing Upper Egypt and a hawk representing Lower Egypt. Beneath the rocks is a circular chamber, which is outlined by the contours of a serpent, within which Hapi, the Nile god, crouches. He clasps a vessel in each hand, ready at the appointed time to pour the water from the eternal ocean to earth in his urns. To the right of the Temple of Isis is a large, circular, castor oil presser. The oil was used for medicinal purposes. The Temple of Hathor has lively and charming representations as befitted the goddess of love and joy. The columns are decorated with flute players and with representations of a laughing dwarf deity Bes, playing a tambourine and a harp. Apes play the lyre, priests carry an antelope, and Bes dances. The Chios of Trajan is rectangular in shape and surrounded by 14 columns with floral capitals. These support blocks that carry the architraves and cornice. The blocks were undoubtedly planned to be carved into sistrum capitals, but they were left unfinished, as were other parts of the structure. The Emperor Trajan, current era 98 to 117, is depicted burning incense in front of Osiris and Isis and offering wine to Isis and Horus. This is possibly the most graceful of the many elegant buildings on the island, and the one for which Philae is most remembered. North of the Temple of Isis is the Temple of Augustus, which was built in the 18th year of his reign. Notably, a stone bearing a trilingual inscription of Cornelius Gallus was found here. Gallus was first Roman prefect appointed after death of Cleopatra VII. It records his victory when he successfully suppressed a revolt by the Egyptians in 29 BC. On the east side of the island is the Roman town gate that leads to a quay. This spectacular gate was probably a triumphal arch built by the Roman Emperor Diocletian. Just beyond the Temple of Imhotep and the Great Pylon is the gate of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, with depictions of the Potomac pharaoh being led forward by Isis. Christianity finally came to the island of Philae, and after the Arabian conquest, many of its inhabitants embraced Islam. There being no further need for isolation from the mainland, the population gradually dwindled. By the Middle Ages, the island was deserted. It is difficult to overrate the importance of the religious complex of Philae. It provides us with a major cult center, which is exceptionally well preserved. Beginning in the Sete period and continuing into the 30th dynasty, it underwent a spectacular flowering in the Greco-Roman period, and because of the circumstances of its dismantling and removal, there is possibly a unique insight into its architectural evolution until and including the conversion to a Christian center. As the last bastia of the ancient Egyptian religious culture, it is no coincidence that the latest datable hieroglyphic inscription, August 24, 394, current era, comes from Philae. The latest demonic inscription is also found here, dating to 452 current era.